When 7-year-old Zion said his dad worked at the Pentagon, the whole class laughed, including the teacher. But what happened next left the room in stunned silence. "Who wants to go next?" Ms. Helbridge asked, smiling at her third-grade class in that overly sweet way substitutes sometimes did when they were trying too hard to be liked. Zion Belrose didn't raise his hand. He never did. But when her eyes landed on him, she tilted her head like she was trying to decode him. "Zion?" she asked gently. "Would you like to share what your parents do for work?" The classroom had gone quiet. Not for him, just for the question. Kids were always eager to brag. "My mom's a dentist. My dad owns a dealership. My mom does TikToks," the usual noise. But when it came to Zion, there was always this pause. Like people weren't sure what they'd get from him. He closed his lunchbox, carefully, like it was a habit, and said with a small, confident voice, "My dad works at the Pentagon." The silence broke fast. Some kids snorted. A girl in the second row leaned toward her friend and whispered, "No, he doesn't." A boy near the window let out a short laugh, then said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "What? Does he clean the windows there?" There was more laughter. Low, rising, awkward, the kind that feeds on itself. Even Miss Helbridge gave a small chuckle. Not unkind, but not careful either. She shook her head like she didn't want to make him feel bad, but also didn't believe him. "Okay, Zion," she said, with that tone adults use when they think they're indulging a child's fantasy. "That's quite a job title." Zion didn't respond. He didn't get red in the face. He didn't look angry or embarrassed. He just looked back at his desk, adjusted the cuffs of his shirt like he always did when he was thinking, and quietly resumed organizing the corner of his math worksheet. What nobody noticed was how still he sat. Not frozen, just still. He didn't blink much. He didn't look around. It was like he understood something they didn't, and he didn't see the point in correcting anyone. Truth was, he wasn't lying. His dad did work at the Pentagon, but Zion already knew most people wouldn't believe that. They saw his skin, his quiet nature, the way he folded his lunch napkin 3 times before throwing it away. They didn't know about the late-night phone calls, or the way his father never answered questions about work with anything other than, "You don't need to know." They didn't see the black SUV that idled outside their apartment some mornings, or the manila folders always locked away in the top drawer of the filing cabinet. So Zion didn't argue. He just waited. The classroom buzzed back into life as Ms. Helbridge called on the next student. Another girl said her mom worked at a bakery. A boy said his dad was a mechanic. The laughter shifted to other stories, other names. Zion's moment passed like it never happened. Then, 15 minutes later, just as they were settling into their spelling quiz, the classroom door opened. The handle clicked softly. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a tall man, skin like deep bark, posture like someone who never slouched a day in his life. His shirt was pressed so sharply you could almost hear the starch. A silver pin on his chest caught the light, and there was a small laminated badge clipped just above his breast pocket. He didn't smile. He didn't scan the room or ask for directions. He looked straight at Zion and said calmly, "I'm here to pick up my son." Zion stood, without a word, slid his pencil into his desk slot, and reached for his backpack. The room didn't move. Even the kid who made the window joke sat frozen, lips parted but saying nothing. Miss Helbridge looked from the man to Zion and back again. Her expression shifted like she was trying to solve a math problem she hadn't studied for. "Sir, Excuse me, do you have—" The man turned to her, pulled out a folded slip from his breast pocket. She took it, glanced down. Her mouth opened, then closed. She handed it back without a word. Zion walked past the rows of desks like he was gliding. He didn't even look at the others, just straight ahead. His backpack strap was slightly twisted, but he didn't stop to fix it. The man held the door for him. Zion stepped through. Then, before leaving, the man turned to the class and said in a voice that was neither loud nor soft, just final, "Always believe the quiet ones. They tend to be right." But what no one knew, what no one was prepared for, was who was about to walk through that door. Outside the classroom, the hallway smelled faintly of pencil shavings and floor polish. Zion walked beside his father, their steps in sync without either of them trying. The weight of what had just happened didn't show on either of their faces, not even in the corners of Zion's eyes, where most kids wear their confusion or pride. Commander Thane Belrose didn't speak at first. He never rushed into conversations, especially not with his son. He waited until they'd reached the car. It wasn't the SUV today. It was a navy blue Ford sedan with tinted windows and no personal touches. No air fresheners, no stickers, no crumbs in the seat cracks. The kind of car that left no story behind. Thane unlocked it with a click and opened the passenger door for Zion. Once they were both inside, seatbelts on, engine humming low, Thane finally glanced at his son. "They laugh?" he asked, eyes still on the road ahead. Zion nodded. Thane didn't react. No sigh, no shake of the head. Just a short silence. "You tell the truth?" he asked. "Yes," Zion replied. "That's all that matters." And then the car pulled away from the school. They drove through Newport, Rhode Island, passing blocks of triple-decker homes and damp sidewalks still shining from the early morning rain. Zion watched the blur of people with umbrellas and coffee cups. He didn't say much on rides like this. His father's presence filled enough space to keep words scarce. But today felt different. "Why do people think I'm lying?" Zion asked suddenly. Thane's jaw moved slightly. That was how you could tell he was thinking. "Because most people believe what makes sense to them, not what makes sense to you." His voice was calm. "And because your last name doesn't carry weight in their heads yet." Zion thought about that. But why did they laugh? Sometimes laughter is fear. Sometimes it's just ignorance. Doesn't matter which. "You keep telling the truth anyway," the silence returned. But it didn't feel empty. As they approached a red light near an old gas station, Thane's phone vibrated in the cup holder. The screen lit up with just a number, no name. He glanced down. Didn't answer. Zion caught the look. "Was that work?" "Always is." They kept driving. When they reached their building, Thane pulled into the small private lot behind their complex. He killed the engine, but didn't get out. Instead, he turned toward Zion, this time fully. "Son, I know today might have felt heavy," he said, voice lower now. "But truth doesn't need applause. It just needs consistency. You tell it. You stand by it. And over time, people realize you don't lie. Not because you're loud, but because you're steady." Zion didn't respond right away, but he took the words in like bricks stacked on each other, meant to build something strong. They got out of the car. Thane held the door for him again. It wasn't for show. He always did that, even when no one was watching. The hallway in their apartment complex was quiet, with only a flickering light near the stairwell. Zion walked ahead while his father grabbed the mail. Bills, envelopes, a plain white package with no return address. Zion unlocked the apartment door, stepped inside, and slipped off his shoes neatly. Thane followed, glancing once at the window before locking the deadbolt behind him. He didn't rush to open the package. He placed it on the kitchen counter, untouched. Zion sat at the table, pulling out the homework he didn't finish earlier. As he worked, Thane stood by the window, arms crossed, watching, thinking. He didn't speak again for the rest of the afternoon. But his presence said everything Zion needed, that he was protected, that he wasn't alone, and that the world was much bigger than third-grade sarcasm. But outside the classroom, something much more complicated was waiting, a world Zion was just beginning to understand. By 6 o'clock, the apartment had gone quiet again. Outside, the streets of Newport had begun to empty. Damp sidewalks reflected headlights as early spring rain drizzled down in thin streaks. Inside, Zion was curled on the living room floor with a book about planetary orbits. He wasn't really reading. He just liked the diagrams, the clean, predictable movement of everything in space. Across the room, Thane was in the kitchen, prepping dinner with quiet precision. He diced vegetables with the rhythm of someone trained to move without waste. Every cut was clean. Every gesture had purpose. "Dinner in 10, he said, without looking up. Zion didn't answer right away. "Dad?" Thane glanced over. Zion hesitated. "Why don't people know what you do?" "Because I'm not supposed to talk about it." "But..." If you're doing good things, why does it have to be secret? Thane paused for a breath, then set the knife down. Because sometimes good things look bad to people who don't understand the whole picture. And sometimes the job means making decisions that don't make sense to everyone. That's why we don't talk about it. Not because it's wrong, but because it's complicated. Zion turned that over like a puzzle piece in his mind. So it's not lying. It's protecting. Exactly. At dinner, they sat across from each other, eating quietly. The TV stayed off. That was Thane's rule. No noise during meals. Zion didn't mind. It gave him space to think. But tonight, it felt like both of them had more questions than answers. Do people hate you because of your job? Zion asked halfway through his broccoli. Thane didn't flinch. Some do. Not because they know me. Just because they think they do. Do you ever get scared? There was a pause, just long enough to notice. I don't let fear make my decisions. But yeah, everyone gets scared. What matters is what you do with it. Zion didn't ask anything else. He finished his plate and took it to the sink without being told. After dinner, Thane went to his home office, a windowless room with a heavy wooden door and a small keypad lock. Zion had only been in there once. It had smelled like metal and paper. Tonight, the door closed behind his father. The clicking of the lock echoed louder than usual. Zion sat alone in the living room. The diagrams in his book didn't hold his attention this time. His eyes kept drifting to the hallway, toward that locked door. Something felt different. Not wrong, just different. Maybe it was the package from earlier, still sitting on the counter, untouched, plain white, no return address. Zion had noticed his father glance at it twice during dinner, but he didn't open it. At 8:45, the door to the office opened. Thane stepped out, looking more tired than usual. He rubbed the back of his neck and headed toward the package. Zion sat up straighter. Thane caught the movement and raised an eyebrow. Still awake? Zion nodded. Couldn't sleep. Thane gave a small shrug, then picked up the package and opened it with his thumb. Inside was a thick folder, black binding, no markings on the front. He flipped it open, scanned a few pages, then closed it again. Zion's voice was small. Is it bad? Thane looked at him. Really looked. Might be. They didn't say anything after that. Thane placed the folder inside the drawer under the sink, behind the cleaning supplies, and slid the drawer shut. Go brush your teeth, he said, without raising his voice. Zion obeyed. 10 minutes later, the apartment was dark except for the hallway light. Zion lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Through the wall, he could hear his father talking softly on the phone, not loud enough to understand, just enough to know he wasn't alone in whatever was happening. But later that night, Zion would wake up to something that didn't make sense. Yet. It was 1:12 a.m. when Zion's eyes opened. Not suddenly. Not because of a nightmare. He just woke up, like a small internal switch had been flipped. He sat up in bed, listening. No wind, no thunder, just a faint thump. Then another. He slid out from under the blanket and padded barefoot to his bedroom door. The apartment was quiet, but something felt off. Not loud, not wrong, just different. Zion opened the door slowly. From the hallway he could see a thin strip of yellow light leaking from under the office door. That door was usually locked at night, but tonight it was open, just a crack. He tiptoed closer, careful to keep his steps even on the hardwood. The voices inside weren't loud, but clear enough now that he was closer. I told you we needed more time, said a man's voice. Low, sharp. Another voice answered, deeper. We don't have time. The leak's already active. Zion's chest tightened. He pressed his back against the wall near the door, just outside their line of sight. You think I don't know that? Thane's voice now, calm but firmer than usual. I warned command last week. They waited. Now we're scrambling to clean it up. There was a shuffle of papers, then the sound of someone pacing. We've got surveillance data coming from multiple angles. Text threads, private logs, badge access. They're all pointing the same direction, the deeper voice said. And the name? Thane asked. A pause. Then the first man replied, It's someone internal. Very internal. Zion didn't understand all of it, but he recognized the weight in their voices. Whatever they were talking about wasn't normal. It wasn't paperwork or training drills. Then came the silence, the kind that meant something heavy had just been shared. Zion peeked around the doorframe. Inside, his father stood with his back to him, arms crossed tightly over his chest. Across from him were two men in dark suits. One bald, one with a buzz cut. Neither looked familiar. Neither smiled. On the table between them was the black folder from earlier. Buzzcut turned his head slightly and saw Zion. Their eyes locked. The man didn't speak, just held Zion's gaze with an expression that wasn't angry, just alert, like he was mentally flipping through files and assessing what to do next. Thane turned slowly, saw Zion in the doorway. "Z," he said, with no hint of surprise, just a tone that meant you shouldn't be here. Zion opened his mouth, then closed it. His heart was thumping hard now, not because he was scared, but because the room felt so full of something he didn't have a name for. Thane walked toward him, crouched down to eye level. "You need to go back to bed." "Are we in trouble?" Zion whispered. Thane didn't lie. "Not yet." Zion's eyes darted past his father to the men in suits. "Who are they? Friends?" Thane said carefully. "The kind who help us keep people safe. From what? Things I'll tell you about someday. When you're ready." Zion didn't fight. He let his dad guide him back to his room. The hand on his shoulder was firm, but not forceful. Back in bed, Zion lay stiff beneath the covers, his eyes staring at the wall as the light under the door flicked off. The men didn't leave until almost 3 o'clock. He knew because he stayed awake until he heard the front door click shut. But Zion couldn't unhear what he heard. And the questions wouldn't stop. The next morning, Zion moved through the halls of Roosevelt Elementary like a shadow. There, but not seen. He didn't speak during roll call, didn't raise his hand during reading group. Ms. Halbridge noticed, but she didn't ask. She assumed it was just a mood. But Zion wasn't distracted. He was watching, noticing. At recess, he sat under the tree near the fence, watching a trail of ants move through the grass. He traced their path with a twig, quietly, until he wasn't alone. "Hey!" a voice said behind him. Zion didn't turn. He already knew it was Trey Lochner. Trey always smelled like cheese sticks and had a voice 1 notch louder than it needed to be. "Was that your dad yesterday?" Trey asked. Zion didn't answer. Trey dropped to the grass beside him anyway. "My brother said he saw him. Said he looked like a cop. Or a spy or something. Said he looked mad, serious." Zion didn't move. Trey leaned closer. "My brother also said guys like that usually disappear. Like they just vanish when stuff gets hot." Now Zion turned his head, just a little. "What does that mean?" "It means," Trey said, pausing dramatically, "your dad's probably in some deep stuff. Like secret files and codes and enemies. Maybe you're in danger too." Zion stared at him for a second. Then, without emotion, he said, "You watch too many movies." Trey blinked. "What?" "You talk a lot, but you don't say anything." Trey's face flushed. "I was just—" "You don't know anything," Zion added, standing up and brushing off his pants. "You just guess loud." He walked away, heading back toward the building even though recess wasn't over. Ms. Halbridge caught sight of him from the bench and waved him over. "You okay, Zion?" she asked. "I'm fine." She hesitated. "You've been quiet today." Zion looked at her. "I'm always quiet." "Quieter than usual." He didn't answer. She squinted at him. "Do you want to talk about anything?" "No," he said. Then added, "I just want to do my work." Miss Halbridge gave a small nod. "All right, if you change your mind, my door's open." Back in class, whispers followed him to his desk. Some kids stared. Some didn't even try to hide it. When the social studies video played on the smartboard, Zion could feel the side eyes burning into him like heat. Later, during group work, 2 girls from his table got up to switch seats without saying why. He didn't ask. Instead, he pulled out his notebook and started copying the glossary from the back of the textbook. He wasn't told to. He just needed something quiet to do. When lunch came around, Zion sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria. His usual friend, Jace, waved from across the room but didn't come over. Zion didn't wave back. He unzipped his lunchbox, PB&J, apple slices, a hard-boiled egg, and placed each item in a neat row like always. His hands moved carefully. Nothing spilled. Nothing dropped. Halfway through his sandwich, someone knocked into his tray. A half-empty carton of chocolate milk slid, tipping onto the table. Zion reached to stop it, but too late. It spilled. Onto his shirt. Onto his book. The boy who bumped him, a fifth grader, laughed under his breath and walked off without a word. Zion stood there, brown stains soaking into the cuffs of his shirt. His jaw clenched, but he didn't cry, didn't shout. He just cleaned it up. The lunch aide came over to help, but he'd already done most of it. "Do you want to call home?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No, it's just milk." She studied him for a second, then walked away. Zion sat back down and quietly finished what was left of his sandwich. But the pressure at school was nothing compared to what was coming at home. That night, the apartment smelled like sautéed onions and chicken broth. Thane was making his signature rice dish, one of the few meals he cooked without looking at a recipe. The kind of dish that took time, not because it was complicated, but because it gave space to think. Zion sat at the table with a pencil in hand, pretending to do math homework. His paper was blank. Thane stirred the pot, checked the heat, then finally said without turning around, "You got hit with milk today?" Zion looked up sharply. "How do you know?" "Word travels." "From who?" "Doesn't matter." Zion blinked. "You got people in my school?" Thane finally turned around. "I've got people everywhere." There was no smirk, no wink, just a flat, steady response. That was what made it more believable than a joke. Zion looked back down at his empty page. "Some kids were talking," he said. "They said you might be in trouble." "Am I?" Thane asked calmly. Zion didn't answer. Thane walked over, pulled out the chair across from his son, and sat down slowly. His hands were calloused from years of training. His eyes were tired in the way people's eyes get when they know too much and don't share most of it. "I want to tell you something," he began, voice quieter now. "You won't understand all of it. And that's okay. I'm not telling you so you can fix it. I'm telling you because you asked." Zion sat still, listening. "I work in counterintelligence," Thane said. "That means I look for people who are pretending to be loyal, but aren't. People who sell secrets. People who lie for the wrong side. People who put this country at risk." He paused. "I don't do it alone. I'm part of a unit that's not on paper. We get information from signals, documents, sometimes from people inside. My job is to track, confirm, and stop the damage before it spreads." Zion's brow furrowed. "So, like spies?" "Sometimes. But not the kind in movies. No gadgets, no car chases, just a lot of patience and pressure." "Are you in danger?" Thane didn't answer right away. "There are people who want me gone," he said finally. "Because I know things they don't want revealed. But danger's part of the job. I've made peace with that." Zion's hands gripped the pencil tighter. "Why don't you quit? Because if I quit, someone else will step in. And maybe they won't be as careful. Maybe they'll overlook something. And maybe people get hurt because of it." Zion stared at his father like he was trying to memorize every line on his face. Thane leaned in, elbows on the table. "You want the truth, Zion? The real truth?" Zion nodded. Thane exhaled slowly. "There's someone inside the Pentagon leaking information. Real classified stuff. And they're doing it in a way that makes it look like I'm involved. That's why I'm being watched. That's why I had visitors last night. And that's why you need to be smart." Zion's voice was small. "Am I in danger?" "I won't let you be," Thane said. And for the first time, Zion heard strain behind his words. He believed him. Not because his father promised safety, but because he knew if there was anyone on Earth who could outthink a threat, it was Thane Belrose. Zion didn't eat much of his dinner that night. Neither did his father. They both cleaned the kitchen in silence, the kind of silence that carries questions neither person wants to ask out loud. When it was time for bed, Zion stood at his door before walking in. "Do you ever wish you had a normal job?" he asked. Thane paused before answering. "Sometimes, but then I remember why I started." Zion turned to go. Oh, and Z? Yeah? Don't talk to anyone about what I told you, not even your teachers. I won't. But that single pause said more than any full answer could. 3 nights later, everything broke open. It was close to midnight. Zion was in bed, but wide awake, staring at the shadows on his ceiling again. Ever since his dad had told him the truth, or at least some version of it, his thoughts didn't settle the same way. They looped, circled, repeated. He'd just rolled onto his side when the sound hit. Not loud, but sharp. A knock. Not at their door. At the back exit to the building, down the hall. He sat up. A few seconds later, another knock. Then a voice. Low, firm, not familiar. Commander Belrose, open the door. Immediate security protocol. We need you to come with us. Zion slid out of bed and crept toward the living room. Thane was already at the door, pulling on boots. His shirt was half-buttoned. He didn't look panicked, just awake in that full, alert way that meant this wasn't new. There were 2 men outside, not the same ones from before. One had a clipboard. The other had a military police patch on his jacket. Commander, we need you at Naval Station Newport. High priority review. There's been an escalation. Thane glanced back toward the hallway, toward Zion's room. Can he stay here alone? Clipboard asked. No, Thane replied immediately. We can call Child Services Protocol. No, Thane repeated, sharper this time. He's staying with the neighbor. I'll walk him over. The men didn't argue. Thane stepped back inside, grabbed a duffel bag, and then knocked on Zion's door. Zion opened it before he could knock twice. You heard. Thane said quietly. Zion nodded. Shoes. Jacket. Let's go. No questions. Zion followed. Down the hall, out the back door, across the narrow walkway to the neighboring unit. He knew the neighbor, Ms. Worthen, retired nurse. Kind. Trustworthy. Thane knocked. She answered in her slippers and a robe. Trouble? She asked. Temporary, Thane said. Can you take him? She nodded and reached for Zion's shoulder. He went with her. Thane knelt down in the doorway. Z, listen to me. You're safe. I'll be back soon. Zion looked at him hard. You sure? As sure as I need to be. Then he stood and walked back into the dark with the 2 men. Zion stood by the window of Ms. Worthen's living room and watched the car disappear down the street, swallowed by the quiet. The next morning came with no answers. Ms. Worthen made breakfast, eggs, toast, juice, and turned the radio on like it was a normal Saturday. But Zion knew better. His father hadn't come back. No calls, no messages, nothing. Around noon, a knock came. It was the same black sedan from school pickup. But Thane wasn't driving. This time it was a woman, early 40s, tan coat, brown folder tucked under one arm. She introduced herself as Agent Karen Darrow. She was polite but precise. She asked to speak to Ms. Worthen alone. Zion pretended not to listen, but he caught enough. Thane was under investigation. No criminal charges. Yet. Unusual activity. Internal breach. National interest. Zion didn't hear his name, but he didn't need to. He could read the tension in Ms. Worthen's eyebrows. Agent Darrow came back to him a few minutes later, crouching down to his level, trying to look gentle. Your dad's okay, she said softly. He's answering some important questions. He asked us to check on you. Zion stared back. What kind of question? Questions about his work. Did he do something wrong? The woman blinked. We're trying to figure that out. That didn't comfort him. Zion stayed with Ms. Worthen that whole weekend. He didn't cry. He didn't call anyone. He just waited, listened to the clock, watched the door, and thought about the moment his dad had hesitated. That half-second pause when he'd asked if they were safe. But sometimes, protecting your country means breaking rules you swore to follow. Monday morning came with a knock. Not sharp, not urgent, just steady. Miss Worthen opened the door, and there he was. Thane Belrose. Unshaven, hair slightly out of place, uniform wrinkled at the shoulders, like he hadn't changed in days. But he stood tall, eyes clear, focused. Zion dropped his cereal spoon and ran to the door, but stopped short. He didn't throw himself into his father's arms. He just looked up, searching his face. You good? He asked. Thane let out the smallest breath of relief. Yeah, I'm good. Zion stepped aside, letting him in. Ms. Worthen, sensing something sacred in the air, excused herself to the back room without needing to be asked. Thane crouched in front of Zion again, just like he had 3 nights earlier. But this time, his voice was softer. I didn't tell them everything, he said. Zion blinked. Why? Because telling the truth in a system built on secrets isn't simple. There's what's real, and then there's what people are ready to hear. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out like the street itself might answer something for him. They wanted me to say something that would have put someone else in the line of fire. Someone innocent. I wouldn't do it. Zion watched him carefully. So they let you go? Sort of. They realized I wasn't the leak, but they're still watching, still waiting. He turned, leaned on the windowsill. I've been walking a line for a long time, Z. Most days I don't know if I'm cleaning up someone else's mess or creating my own by staying quiet. But this weekend, I decided I'm done protecting things that don't deserve it. Zion stepped closer. So what now? Thane gave a small shrug. Now I do the hard thing. I report what I know, but not through the chain. I go outside of it. Someone in my command's selling access, not just passing notes, sensitive material, patterns, logistics. And if I don't report it, it keeps going. Zion looked down. Will they try to stop you? Maybe, Thane admitted. But I've got enough leverage to keep them nervous. And if they push back, then the story becomes public. There was silence between them again. The kind that had weight, not distance. Later that week, Thane didn't go back to his office. He went to DC for meetings with independent investigators. Zion didn't know the details, but he could feel the shift. His dad's phone buzzed constantly, and the manila folders got replaced with newer, thicker ones. The SUV came back. So did the 2 agents. But this time, they asked Thane for advice, not explanations. Zion returned to school on Wednesday. No one laughed when he walked in. Even Trey just gave him a head nod. Some odd mix of apology and approval. Miss Halbridge greeted him with a careful smile, like she didn't know what had changed, only that something had. At lunch, Jace sat next to him again. They didn't talk about any of it. They talked about planets, movies, and who had the best lunchbox. It was exactly what Zion needed. That afternoon, he was called to the office. He assumed something bad, but it was just a man from the district asking him quietly if he was okay at home, if he needed support, if he ever felt unsafe. Zion told the truth. I'm fine. After school, Thane was waiting in the same Ford sedan. Not the SUV, not the black car, just the regular, silent, forgettable sedan. How was school? He asked as Zion got in. Zion shrugged. Easier. They sat for a minute in silence, the way they always did before the engine turned. Zion looked at his dad. Did you win? Thane gave a small laugh under his breath. Not yet, but I didn't lose. Was it worth it? Thane rested his hand on the gear shift and stared straight ahead. Ask me again when you're older. Zion didn't press him. He looked out the window and watched the school shrink behind them as they pulled away. But years later, people would still remember that one quiet kid who never lied. 10 years later, Zion Belrose stood behind the podium at his high school's senior awards ceremony in Providence. His tie was crooked, but no one noticed. They were too focused on the way he spoke, measured, calm, direct. The valedictorian. The same boy who once sat alone at lunch with peanut butter sandwiches arranged by corners. He glanced at the paper in front of him but didn't read from it. His eyes scanned the crowd. My dad always told me that telling the truth doesn't mean people will believe you, he began. He said it just means you'll never have to remember what you made up. There was a quiet ripple of laughter in the audience. Small, understanding. When I was 7, I told my class that my father worked at the Pentagon. They laughed. Even the teacher didn't believe me. I didn't argue. I just waited. Zion paused. 15 minutes later, he walked into the classroom. In uniform. Calm. Real. He scanned the front row, where Thane sat. Older now, with more grey at his temples and lines on his forehead he didn't used to have. But still watching the same way, still steady. I didn't know what he really did back then. I just knew he worked hard, kept secrets and came home when he could. I know more now. Some things he never told me directly, but I figured them out along the way. Another pause. Zion let the moment breathe. There's something I learned from all of that, and I want to pass it to everyone sitting here, especially the ones who don't get invited to sleepovers, who get looked at sideways because of their skin, their silence, or their parents' jobs, the ones who get laughed at when they tell the truth too early. He took a slow breath. Just because you're not loud doesn't mean you're not right. And just because someone laughs doesn't mean they know more than you. Quiet people carry things, watch things, remember things. And sometimes we know exactly what we're saying. The crowd was still, locked in. I didn't become valedictorian because I talked the most. I got here because I paid attention, because I learned to listen, to ask questions instead of shouting answers, and to never lie, not even when it would have made things easier. The auditorium broke into applause. Real applause. The kind that starts small and grows because people know they've heard something true. After the ceremony, students shook his hand. A few teachers hugged him. Ms. Halbridge, long retired, even showed up, her hair thinner, her walk slower. She smiled at him with mist in her eyes. I believed you. After that day, she whispered. Zion smiled politely, but didn't say more. Outside, under the setting sun, Thane waited by the car. You've come a long way, he said. So have you, Zion replied. They didn't hug. Didn't need to. The drive home was mostly quiet, but not empty. It had weight. The same rhythm they'd always had. Zion leaned his head back, watching the orange light flicker through the window. You ever regret any of it? He asked suddenly. Thane didn't ask what he meant. I regret not telling you sooner, he said. Not because you needed to know, but because you were ready to hear more than I gave you. Zion nodded once. That was enough. The next morning, Zion packed for Georgetown. Full scholarship, political science. He didn't know if he wanted to work in intelligence, but he knew he wanted to be the kind of person people eventually listened to, even if they didn't at first. At the door, he turned back to his father. I'll keep telling the truth, he said. Thane gave the kind of look that only fathers give, half pride, half caution. Good. Just make sure it's the truth that matters. Zion stepped into the hallway with his bag over his shoulder. This time, no one laughed. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been doubted for telling the truth or overlooked for being quiet, subscribe. Stick around. We've got more real stories to tell.